Hey there, School Transportation Nation. We're glad you made it to the podcast. It's brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, and IC Bus. The next generation can change everything. I'm Tony Corbin, publisher and president of School Transportation News. I have with me Mr. Ryan Gray, editorial extraordinaire. Ryan, welcome, sir.
Hello, Tony. It's great, as always, to be a part of the nation.
All right, we got some good stuff planned for you today. Have some interviews coming up. Ryan is speaking with Haiman and Vinny Riscica from the New York State Energy Research Development Authority. Ryan, I'm betting that is about electric school buses in the state of New York. Would I be right?
I venture a guess that yes, I think you are correct on that one.
Well, you know, the hammer is dropping all electric vehicles by 2027, and everybody's probably panicking in the streets as the days click by. So we will be excited to see what that conversation looked like, because, that's going to be a bit of a framework for maybe the rest of the country. I mean, California is probably watching that real close because there's a lot of other states have dropped this kind of mandate to go all electric by specific dates in 2030, 2027, 2035. There's, we've got varying dates out there. So quite interesting to hear what those folks have to say.
Absolutely. Yes. There's a lot there that folks can listen to, and a lot of things that are going on nationwide. Now, not the mandate that New York has, but certainly a lot of the tools that are available that both Vinny and Nina discuss. So stay tuned for that one.
Great. And I hear there's a bit of a legal boxing match on E-rate for school bus Wi-Fi out there. That sounds kind of sporty. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that. And right now, we're going to get to a quick message from one of our sponsors before we hit those headlines. All right, Ryan, ST Next will be in right around the corner. That means it's time for Top Transportation Teams Award. Guys, are you a top transportation team? Don't keep it to yourself. Get the recognition you and your team members deserve by enrolling in the Top Transportation Teams Award program. Guess what? Our friends at TransFinder launched this Top Transportation Teams program last year and had great success. 6 teams from across North America received special recognition and were honored at STN Expo West in Reno. They got complimentary tickets, accommodations, tons of media attention. You don't even have to be a TransFinder client, though I'm sure you'd love to be. Contractors are also encouraged to enroll in this award. Visit toptransportationteams.com to learn more. Why should you enroll? Bragging rights for sure, but your team will also learn from other school districts and private fleet contractors on how to become the best team they can be, better than ever. Enrollment ends May 3rd, so get started today. Visit toptransportationteams.com. Okay, Ryan, kick us off. Legal battle, E-rate. What is happening out there?
Well, this has been an ongoing issue. Those who have been following the topic are reporting of this ever since last year. So to bring those of you up to speed who maybe aren't aware, FCC ruled last October that they were extending the applicability of funding for school bus Wi-Fi hotspots under the federal E-rate program, also known as the Universal Service Program that was started under the 1996 Telecommunications Act by Congress. A lot of money available in perpetuity, seemingly, for school bus Wi-Fi hotspots and equipment, the installation of all that. So up to now, the E-rate program has been for internet connectivity in classrooms and in libraries. FCC said, hey, we recognize school buses as an extension of the classroom. This should get funding. We know that we had the Emergency Connectivity Act, which the American Recovery Plan had legislated. That ran out. Congress decided not to continue funding that. And here we are here in 2024. The work has already begun. School districts have already been applying for the funds for this fiscal year, coming out later this year. And then we have a brief, actually, it's a petition for review of an order of the FCC that was filed with the U.S. District Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit last month. by an organization known as David's Legacy. And there was an amicus brief that was tied to this from Senator Ted Cruz and some other congressional members who have been opposing this. And so we reported previously that Ted Cruz is among those who cites FCC overreach, saying that Congress never intended for school buses or anything non-classroom, non-library to get these funds. And that is part of the petition that is before the court on this one. So certainly, we'll see how that plays out. But what was more interesting to me was the second argument to this, Tony, which was basically saying that students are quote unquote unsupervised on school buses and they shouldn't be able to access the internet on the school bus ride. And there's a quote in there along the lines of basically, instead of trigonometry, TikTok. And as we know, though, our relationship with a lot of the providers of this service is that that's not how it works. It's not just that you go into the school bus and you're able to access any website you want and kids can browse and go on social media. There's content filters, and these solutions, they tie into school networks and IT departments. School IT departments are the ones that are really running these programs, installing them. So I actually spoke with one of the founders of David's Legacy, Maureen Molak. She's actually one of the petitioners along with her husband. And it was interesting because obviously this organization arose out of a tragedy. Her son David killed himself after being subjected to years, according to her, of cyberbullying and just bullying and harassment in general at school. So obviously it's one of those topics that's at the forefront of minds of all parents. Certainly I think of it all the time with my kids. Luckily that, my daughter is on, has a Chromebook assigned to her through school. But she's on there and she's using apps and websites, educational websites. But it prompted me to look the other day, and I was talking to her. I said, "Can you access Google?" And she said, "Yeah, that's how I look up things." And so it did get me thinking about that. But from a standpoint of a school bus environment, I asked Maureen, well, what about all the kids that have cell phones? I saw some stats that, I don't remember the stat per se, but it was a high number of kids that are 12 years old and older that have cell phones. So how do you manage that? It would seem to me that school bus Wi-Fi hotspot is actually more secure, more safe than everything else that kids can do.
I would agree with that. I would totally agree with that point. I think that there are many measures that are out there, filters on school bus Wi-Fi. Most school boards and technology companies have this technology in place specifically to avoid children going out and playing video games on their device because it's supposed to be used for school work, school activities. And we know there's an intranet system within schools that can access schoolwork or different applications, as we've discussed. So, it's tough for me to really look at this and say, okay, could they've had a tragedy, but I just don't see how not approving school bus Wi-Fi has anything to do with cyberbullying. I think that they are two very different conversations. Obviously, bullying happens. We talk about it all the time in the magazine in different ways. I mean, if there's abuse from, like in Colorado, where we saw that aide abusing a nonverbal special needs child, right? That's like a physical abuse. But when they hide behind a computer or a device, that's where it can have a psychological toll on a student that you might not even know. And, that's when we have some of these, shooter events where, the student breaks and all of a sudden they're out there looking for blood. And it's like, oh my God, how did we get to this point where there's this injustice that's occurred, and how do you make it right? And I don't know. I feel like this is just it's a political storm that, school bus Wi-Fi has somehow been caught up in.
Well, and the whole reason that FCC has done this is to close the homework gap. So we know that, that really was exacerbated with COVID-19, and this existed for a long time. It's nothing new that too many households, millions of them nationwide, don't have access to reliable or any broadband internet. So how are these kids supposed to be getting their homework done? It's certainly, like I said, during COVID, when everything went virtual, that's when folks really stood up and said, hey, we need to do something about this. And I think that's where the FCC came down. Now, again, you're absolutely right, Tony. Politics is at play here. When FCC approved this last fall, there's 5 commissioners, and 3 of them are Democrats. Those 3 voted for it. The other 2 are Republicans, and guess what? They didn't vote for it. Not to get political, but hey, it's a political issue. Ted Cruz is a Republican. You can, it's not, you don't have to make a far leap there to see what's going on. And there's other things that they argue that there's no way for the FCC to determine how successful this program is. Well, but then we talk to the providers and they have a lot of data to share with us. We've talked with school districts. One of them, Farmington Municipal Public Schools in New Mexico. We did an article recently talking to Billy Hewish, who's the transportation director down there. He's on a panel that I'm moderating in Indianapolis next month on school bus Wi-Fi. He's got a lot of data to share and show the number of homework hours, and then the number of kids that are accessing when, how long. So the claims that this is not available or there's no ability to do this is just wrong. It's just incorrect.
Positive outcomes, Ryan. I think we're looking for, the talk has always been at the root of it. Is the school bus an extension of the classroom, right? And with the FCC making this vote, we basically got clarity. Yes, the federal government now views the school bus as an extension of the classroom. And even at the AASA conference in San Diego, where we gave our Superintendent of the Year award, we were at a general session at the awards ceremony, and they talked about E-rate on school buses. And you're in front of thousands of superintendents, and school bus Wi-Fi for E-rate was a main talking point at this session. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, this is much bigger than I even thought it was going to be, because I thought, only transportation is going to care about this. No, the superintendents and the administrative level is really looking at this thinking, how can we really include the school bus as part of that conversation? And I loved that. I really was thinking, this is so important for our industry to have the support of the administration at this level. And we have all these industry leaders coming together, and that's a topic of conversation on the main stage. Big time stuff.
Well, and it's absolutely an issue that goes well beyond transportation, because as I mentioned, a lot of these programs, they're being run by the IT departments. Billy Hewish in New Mexico talks about how he worked with his special education department. So what he had done is he had made sure that after he had gotten most of his buses equipped with the equipment for the hotspots, he went ahead and I believe it was like 18 buses that are used for transporting students with IEPs, those routes. And he worked with the special education department to make sure that because there's certain programs that these students are accessing via a tablet or a computer, that they can actually watch those or interact with them on the bus ride. So certainly it goes beyond transportation. And in talking with a lot of transporters, they're actually a little bit divorced from the project. It's their buses and the equipment's going in. But again, the IT departments a lot of them are installing the equipment. They are the ones that obviously are managing the network that these cellular Wi-Fi basically are tied to. So it's definitely a school district wide program. But here we are again. We've been talking about this a lot lately, Tony. 2024, we're in an election year. We'll see how November shakes out. But certainly, this is being looked at by the U.S. District Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit. And again, the goal of this is to roll this back. So it will be very interesting, to say the least, to see what happens next with this.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting, Ryan, to see how this plays out. Let's talk about some other hot topics. So we had NHTSA come out with a final rule. So automatic emergency braking. So what's the story on that?
So this is automatic emergency braking for passenger vehicles, so the small light duty cars and trucks. And you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with school bus? Last June, almost a year ago, we had an article about this where NHTSA was actually had its NPRM on this, and we were looking at it and saying, well, what do student transporters have to know or need to know about this? And really, this is automatic emergency braking that includes pedestrian automatic emergency braking. So from that standpoint of illegal passing that we're talking about, we've seen a lot of pedestrian and student detection systems in school buses. A new one actually just came out recently. But in terms of vehicles, what better way to utilize this solution than in the danger zone, where we know that, according to the NASDIP surveys, we have tens of millions of these illegal passings in a school year across the country. So certainly something from a technology standpoint, while not for school buses specifically, that readers and audience out there, you need to know about this.
Ryan, that's really good that we look at these trends and see how it affects our industry. There's a bit of a halo effect sometimes on these rules. So be quite curious to see long-term the other safety implications of this. So yeah, food for thought. Let's talk about safety as well. So hot topic we've probably heard a lot about in the mainstream media, which is marijuana obviously being downgraded in terms of its classification. Now, when I saw it, first thing I thought is, doesn't matter, zero tolerance policy for commercial drivers. But I guess we'll see how this plays out.
Well, there's a lot of things that have to happen first. So the Biden administration and the Drug Enforcement Agency came out last week and said that this is their goal to move forward with rulemaking toward this. So we need to go through the hoops and the hurdles as we do with any regulations or revising existing regulations. So they're basically looking to lower the classification, not legalize marijuana per se, but so it's not considered at the same level of heroin and some of the harder drugs. But as you note, Tony, yes, there is a zero tolerance for CDL holders managed through the FMCSA. But as we've seen recently, lots of states have been legalizing marijuana, and more continue to do so every year, seemingly during the election cycle. And we've also had the emergence of CBD, which we know that a lot of those oils or edibles or whatnot can have levels of THC in them. And we've had drug and alcohol experts out at our conferences talking about this, where you really need to be careful. And training is extremely important to get to your drivers, get to your staff, so that they're educated on this, because so many folks, they know, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not supposed to take drugs, but then they see all these things marketed to them and told, oh, there's no THC at all. Well, these experts have said that's not necessarily the case. This CBD is not governed by the FDA. So the claims that they make, you don't really know what's in this stuff. So it's just one of those things where, knowledge of the issue is best. Get out in front of it. Use this as a training opportunity with your staff. And again, there has to be rulemaking that is implemented before anything comes to fruition with this. Did reach out to the FMCSA again about this, and they basically, said that this still has to be reviewed by the White House Office of Management and Budget, and then undergo a pretty extensive public comment period. Then it has to be reviewed by an administrative judge. So it's premature, really, at this point for FMCSA to speculate that how this would impact proposed rulemaking. But again, this is something, more knowledge is good. Be aware of this so that you can get out in front of it with your staff.
Excellent. All right, Ryan, we got a quick green tip and we're heading into your interview with NYSERDA. Today's EV funding tip is brought to you by IC Bus. Are you ready to take advantage of another round of EPA grant funding to support your school district's sustainability goals? As your trusted advisor, IC Bus and their dealer network are ready to answer questions on all available funding sources, grants, and tax incentives, including the new $400 million Clean Heavy-Duty Vehicle Grant Program. Time is of the essence to get your application submitted by July 25th. For application assistance, visit icbus.com/clean school bus. That's icbus.com/clean school bus and start your journey for electric today.
All right, Nation, we're back. We want to welcome two guests today. They are both from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, also known as NYSERDA. Please welcome Nina Haiman and Vinny Riscica. Nina and Vinny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So Nina, you are the NYSERDA Program Manager for Clean Transportation. Vinny, you are the NYSERDA Senior Project Manager for Clean Transportation. There's been so much conversation around electric school buses. Obviously, that's really the topic du jour. And with New York, especially, the most aggressive timeline for adopting and implementing electric school buses, 2027, we're only about almost a little over 2.5 years away from all new school bus purchases needing to be zero emissions vis-a-vis electric, with a 2035 date, give or take, for full fleet implementation of zero emissions. First of all, Nina, why don't you share with our audience, who is NYSERDA? What are you charged with doing? What is your mission?
Sure. And thank you so much for having us. So NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and we are the state authority charged with promoting energy efficiency, renewable energy, and emissions reductions across the state. And so obviously that includes cleaning up the transportation sector.
Okay, great. So with this very, as I mentioned, aggressive mandate, so if you can give our audience some background. So this is a state law that was passed, and there is quite a bit of money that the governor has made available. Why don't you take us through some of the nuts and bolts of what this mandate says, what it means to school districts?
Sure. So New York State is committed to transitioning its entire school bus fleet to zero emission operation by 2035. So that's, 1.5 million students a day riding these buses. It's 45,000 buses. And this is really we're the largest school bus fleet in the country. We think this is really the right thing to do, first and foremost for student health, but also for local air quality and to help the state hit its climate targets concerning greenhouse gas emissions. So 2035 is 11 years away, but we also have some sort of interim milestones in there as well. Sort of most importantly, I'd say the one you just mentioned, starting in 2027, school districts should only be purchasing zero emission buses. They can keep the older vehicles in the fleet until 2035, when the entire fleet should be zero emission.
Okay, so an 11-year runway or so that you mentioned, keeping in mind that, of course, now there's no school bus replacement plan or mandate requirement in New York, but 11 years is around the time that school districts or school bus companies, depending on their contract, what their contract says, keep school buses in active service. So that means school districts that are buying buses today, they could be, certainly in that window where they would need to start replacing them with the next bus, which in this case is electric, of course. But let's talk a little bit about, more about the money that's available. So overarching, there's like a $4.2 billion Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act.
Yep.
And within that, there's a New York School Bus Incentive Program. And I know that we've written quite a bit on this lately. There's I believe, $100 million that was made available recently, and it's going to come in chunks, right?
Yep, that's correct. So there's $500 million out of the Environmental Bond Act that New York voters supported back in November of 2022. So the first $100 million has been made available to help school districts with this transition. And we're using that in a few ways. First of all, to help districts sort of create their plans for electrification, because we know that each district has different routes, different buses, different depot locations, different weather, different terrain. And so we're using those funds to help school districts put together their own personalized fleet electrification plans to help them sort of step-by-step guide their way through that transition to get to 2035. And then also putting money out there to help school buses cover the incremental cost difference between internal combustion engine vehicles and electric vehicles, and then also to pay for some of their charging needs. And just, one thing that kind of goes back to what you were just saying a moment ago about folks making their purchases today. There is this, 11-year runway, and that's really why we're trying to ask folks, to get started now buying 1 or 2 buses today that are electric, to sort of start getting your feet wet and get familiar with the technology and with how they operate. And the NYSBIP, New York State Bus Incentive Program, NYSBIP, funds are really meant to help districts sort of get started on that process.
Absolutely. So, and I understand, and you can and discuss more to this. There are some extensions, I would say, and it's based upon need. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. So districts that don't feel like they're able to meet the 2027 deadline to start buying zero-emission vehicles are able to request a 2-year extension from the New York State Education Department. So not NYSERDA, but NYSED. But in order to do that, they do need to sort of have done some planning work to kind of indicate why they believe the extension is necessary. And so, we're asking folks partially for that reason to really get started doing their fleet electrification plans, which, just to reiterate, are funded by NYSERDA, largely or entirely funded, depending on the district, by NYSERDA.
Okay. So the really the elephant in the room for everybody when we're looking at electrification, of course, is cost. You mentioned that, of course, with the incremental cost, which today can be 2.5 times what people are paying for a comparable equipped diesel bus. Granted, diesel buses everything's getting more expensive, right? Something that we hear over and over again from districts, that anxiety about how to pay for it.
Yep.
I did see there was an estimate that came out from the conservative think tank Empire Center. I believe it was earlier this year, that huge range here, that it will take between $8 billion and $15 billion to electrify the entire fleet. And then we're talking about 45,000 buses. And as you mentioned, Nina, the largest state fleet in the U.S. But, those are some of the concerns. There are certainly others that we've talked to, especially when they're rural districts and their service area. Vinny, let's bring you into the conversation here. What concerns specifically have you been hearing, has NYSERDA been hearing from school districts across the state, whether they are rural or they're more urban or in that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to first acknowledge that we definitely understand what districts are going through. Change is hard. The transition is an undertaking, right? We're asking school districts across the state to adopt a new technology, which always takes some time and preparation. Nina acknowledged and you acknowledged this runway with the interim 2027 and then the ultimate 2035 timelines. And our goals is, trying to educate people ahead of those timelines when they need to start buying buses that are zero emission and have a full fleet. The biggest challenges that we're hearing really are around what you talked about: cost, obviously, time, and know-how. So on the cost side, obviously, you mentioned the upfront cost of school buses, in addition to, needing to pay for charging infrastructure, because, fueling infrastructure is no longer going to be used for these buses, obviously. But we do have, significant financial resources to help reduce the upfront cost of the bus. And so that's really what we're focusing on with the school bus vouchers through the New York School Bus Incentive Program. We also like to point out it's really important for districts to know that over the life of a bus, electric school buses can be cheaper, especially when you factor in those incentives. We've been seeing this with the school districts who have been the early adopters and have buses in their fleet. Maintenance is significantly lower and easier to the buses are easier to maintain, and obviously not obviously necessarily, but electricity is cheaper in most cases than fueling buses. So there are operating cost savings that over the length of owning a bus, you start to recoup those cost differentials. The other thing to note in New York State is we're very lucky to have state aid, and obviously school districts have different aid ratios between around 7% and up to 90%. But state aid can now cover electric school buses in addition to charging infrastructure and even depot upgrades to accommodate some of that infrastructure. And then in the long run, we do expect, as with most new technologies, we do expect the cost of electric buses to come down over time and help districts, transition when those incentive dollars are dried up. On the timing side of things, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of time to invest, and school districts are stretched already with lots of responsibilities. I'm sure you talk about driver shortages on this podcast quite a bit. We've spoken to transportation directors and teachers even who have their CDLs so that they can drive a bus when needed. So we're conscious of that and not wanting to put more responsibilities onto transportation directors and everybody. So we're trying to really, through this fleet electrification plan process, give the assistance and help provide engineering support to tackle these big challenges. We can get into this a little bit more later, but we have this electric school bus guidebook, which we're really excited about. We sort of break the whole transition down into these like 5 or 10 minute reads, 5 to 10 page chunks. So you can, go in and, learn a little bit about how to buy electric buses or the safety associated with electric buses or how to plan your site and do those in short bursts. And then, know-how I mentioned as well. I think, purchasing your first bus or two, as Nina said, is really the way to get your feet wet. We've had, as I said, a handful of districts who have done this already. And we hear back from those districts, a lot of them, that they've really, feel more confident going into the transition. They have the experience needed and they're able to train more drivers throughout this process. We've heard lots of positive feedback from drivers and technicians on electric buses.
Okay, great. So we'll come back to that fleet implementation planning tools because there's a lot there to unpack, and that's really
Sure.
What we're seeing is what folks need to really be paying attention to, along with developing a great relationship with your utility. But back to those costs. So in terms of what NYSERDA brings to the table from that funding, from that $4.2 billion bond act, $500 million for school buses, can you, Nina, talk more about what those grants look like, what's available for that purchasing the vehicles as well as the infrastructure?
Yeah, definitely. So on the vehicle side, the funding is available upfront. So it's available to school districts or to school bus contractors if a district contracts out, and that discount is applied immediately. So we help cover the incremental cost difference between the ICE vehicle or the electric vehicle, and it's taken off right from the very top. So the exact amount depends on the size of the bus you buy and whether you have add-ons, but for a Type A bus, $114,000 is sort of the starting amount. More funds are available for priority districts. Priority districts are those that are considered to be high need or are in disadvantaged communities. And then for, the amount available goes all the way up to $156,000 for a Type D bus. And again, with additional funds available for priority districts. Also additional funds available if you retire a vehicle that's 7 years old or older, or buy a V2G capable bus, or a bus with wheelchair compatibility. So we think that's, really helps districts quite a lot with getting started. So you only want to hear about the vehicle side, so I'll stop there. But yeah, that's, I think, a really good incentive program. And we also offer charging.
Okay. So, but, in terms of, so that's vehicle, but, so is there also for the infrastructure
Yes.
side too? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Also available, the chargers, you apply separately than the buses, but basically one bus entitles you to one charger. And baseline amount there is $25,000 per charger and associated infrastructure, more for priority districts. And in fact, the fleet electrification plans that we were talking about earlier, we are such sort of strong believers in the importance of completing those that we've said that districts that complete an FEP are entitled to an additional $30,000 for charging infrastructure per bus if an FEP is completed.
Okay. So in terms of looking at that $500 million, obviously that's not going to, if you're looking at all 45,000 school buses, and granted, there are, some electric school buses already in the state. So we're not starting at completely, zero. But still, it's there's quite a mountain to climb here in terms of funding. The money available through this bond act will only go so far. Is there any other money coming beyond potentially beyond this $500 million, or is this really what we're looking at right now? Is that something NYSERDA can talk about, or?
Sure. So I think at this point, the NYSERDA funding available is $500 million. But I would say just one point to make, and I'm sure your audience is familiar with this, we have seen the cost of electric vehicles, decline substantially over the last decade, and the technology improve. And we expect the same thing to happen with electric school buses as well. So we do think these costs will be coming down, which is significant. And as Vinny mentioned earlier, the operational costs are lower. So the upfront cost is higher, but we think the total cost of ownership, you start reaching parity pretty quickly.
Yeah, of course, certainly COVID and the supply chain did not help as we saw everything spike.
Right.
We've been talking about that, where we had a technologist talk at our SDN Expo Reno, I believe it was in 2018, talking about how batteries were coming down and had come down so much. And then COVID happened and we saw this big spike. So obviously, a lot of money needed for endeavors like this. Vinny, obviously, there's a lot of federal money that's available. Can you talk more about that? Certainly, of course, first thing that comes to mind is the Clean School Bus Program, the EPA.
Yeah, great shout out there. I think a lot of what we're trying to do with our New York School Bus Incentive Program with that $500 million is find ways to have to funnel more federal money into New York State and have our program stretch further. So EPA Clean School Bus, you mentioned, through the first two rounds, we've got 330 buses coming to New York State. It's a pretty sizable chunk. And now that the New York School Bus Incentive Program is there, if districts do apply for those clean school bus incentives and receive either one of the rebates or grant awards, we can match some funding there. So, you'll get more than you would get through either program individually. That's a significant added incentive for districts to apply for those larger incentives as well. EPA Clean School Bus, the numbers are changing sort of by round, but currently there's around $200,000 for non-priority districts per bus and charger combined, and then $345,000 currently for priority districts. The EPA, recently we were talking earlier about the EPA Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle Program. It seems like it's going to be a one-off program, but the EPA allocated around $1 billion for that, and I think 70% is allocated to school buses. We expect, they said around 92 million for Region 2, which includes New York State. And so that's another huge chunk of money, and we would do a similar type matching program. Our goal is to be flexible with NYSBIP. We should say is, we want to adapt to what other programs are out there and try and encourage districts to pull in these other programs. In addition to those EPA funds, there is the IRS 45W and 30C tax credits, really just great names. But on the vehicle side, there's the Commercial Clean Vehicle Tax Credit, that's 30C, and that can, after incentives are applied, can cover up to $40,000 per commercial vehicle, which includes school buses. So very much encouraging districts to apply for that. Even though they are tax exempt entities, they can apply for a direct pay version of that incentive. And then 45W is the alternative fuel refueling property credit, aka that can go towards charging stations being installed at bus depots. And there's up to $100,000 per site for that program too. So, after you factor in the incentives that we offer for buses, for the chargers associated with those buses, there's a lot more that can be picked up by these federal programs. And then I'll stop in a second, but in New York State, we also have our utilities provide make-ready funding. And so that can cover generally up to 90% on the what they call the utility side, which is, if you're electrifying 100 buses at your depot, you might trigger some substation upgrades or transformer upgrades on the grid side. And so that can cover up to 90% of those costs. In addition, they can cover up to 50% of what are called customer side costs, which is the infrastructure basically from your property line to where you're plugging in your chargers. And that also overlaps with our charging incentives. So we primarily focus with NYSBIP on the charger itself, but if there's additional funds left over, that can also cover things like wiring and conduit, panel upgrades, stuff that helps set you up for electrifying the rest of your fleet beyond just that first vehicle. So that's why with the fleet electrification plan, we really encourage districts to do that, get that extra $30,000 and put it toward what we call future-proofing your site.
So lots of money available. But back to what you were referring to earlier, we can get a little bit more in detail. School districts and school bus companies, they need to make sure that they do a fleet-wide, operation-wide analysis to make sure that their electrification deployments are successful. So fleet implementation planning tools, there's a lot of them out there. A lot of the OEMs have basically opened up consulting divisions within their companies to help customers through their dealers. We have this new era of contractors, electrification as a service, charging as a service. NYSERDA also has tools. Vinny, can you talk to me more about what NYSERDA is bringing to state school districts in terms of fleet implementation planning?
Yeah, absolutely. I should start by going back to the Electric School Bus Guidebook. That really is the get your feet wet, understand the full magnitude of things you need to think about, start assembling your team. But on the fleet electrification planning side, Nina said, we're very excited about it. We really think it's really important, and it helps take some of that pressure off the school districts. What we do is when districts reach out to us, and they can reach out by emailing schoolbus@nyserda.ny.gov. They reach out to us and we can help them find an engineering firm or engineering and architecture firm as a partner to help them complete their study. We review the scope of work for that study. So we make sure that it's giving the school district all that they need throughout the process. And we're there as a partner for the school district throughout the process to help navigate those conversations. The fleet electrification plan starts off with data collection. This is like basic 101 stuff, but is really difficult sometimes. We know that some school districts are, still using paper and pens to do their routes. And so getting yourself set up with a database of all your routes, where they're stopping and how long those routes are, topography and things like that, getting all that information is really helpful up front. And then our engineering partners will do a route analysis. So determine, which routes are feasible with today's technology, what's the minimum battery size that can achieve those routes, and sort of give a sort of prioritized list of, these are the routes we recommend electrifying today. And these are the ones we say, maybe as you get closer to 2034, 2035, waiting on those. And then getting into charging specifications. So identifying what types of chargers to select. There's a lot of charging products out there. Some of them are great. There's a lot of innovation on the charging side as well. But we want to make sure districts are selecting chargers that are going to work for them and also help them optimize their costs. So things like charge management software are really important, and our engineering partners look at how districts can reduce their costs by charging their buses in a smarter way. They lay out all the infrastructure on site. They engage with the utility on behalf of the school district, so that the district isn't, having to navigate that conversation with their utility. They get an assessment of any upgrades that are needed on the grid side and on the customer side, as I said. And then at the end of it, they get a prioritized plan, phased out. This is when you should start purchasing buses to align with 2035. This is when you're going to want those infrastructure upgrades to take place so that you can, scale up your fleet. It really is a comprehensive look at things, including, costs and in addition to that, incentives. And we've had some consultants also looking into, as you mentioned, charging as a service, energy as a service options for school districts too, which, are starting to be investigated in New York State.
So a great peek behind the curtain. No matter if you're in New York or not, these are things, issues, this implementation planning that school districts, bus companies nationwide need to be doing. And as we know, the in New York's case, 27 to 2035, that's 11 years or ish, but it goes by quick. And especially knowing that it's taking school districts anywhere from a year to sometimes 2.5 years to get the power they need from their utilities. So a lot there to chew on. And I really appreciate Nina and Vinny for coming on and sharing your expertise and telling our audience more about the New York State mandate for electric school buses. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
A special thanks to Mr. Ryan Gray, Nina, Vinny. Thanks for joining this episode. We really appreciate your insights. Special thanks to our sponsors, TransFinder and IC Bus. Guys, don't forget to visit stnonline.com for the latest news and analysis on everything happening in the school transportation industry. Sign up for STN Expo this summer. Make sure you get the best in training. We got leadership, safety, security, technology, energy, operations. We got it all. Special needs too. Head Start. Guys, can't miss it. Don't forget about our special maintenance trainings as well. Special visit out there at STN Expo Indianapolis to Cummins Engine. It's exclusive for STN Expo Indy attendees. So make sure you register today. Go to stnexpo.com for all the details. Guys, don't forget, subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. Make sure you subscribe so you get every episode of all the latest in the School Transportation Nation network. We appreciate you very much, Nation, and we love you. We'll see you next week.